The History of Middle-earth is Christopher Tolkien's monumental 12-volume compilation of his father's unpublished legendarium, along with extensive notes and commentary. The Digital Tolkien project has long aspired to extend its work to these volumes. Our new site, HomeBase, is intended to be the hub of the Digital Tolkien project's work on the history of Middle-earth.
In this video, we want to share the work that we've done so far and highlight some key features and tools you can use to explore the books. We want to make the history of Middle-earth more accessible and lay a foundation for further scholarship, continuing Christopher's legacy.
We begin with an overview of the 12 volumes. Each volume gets a page with a table of contents and, in some cases, errata. We've started on rich bibliographic data tied to broader work that the Digital Tolkien project is doing for other books.
We've also begun to write articles to help readers better understand aspects of the stories. For example, this timeline of the Lost Tales frame narrative. Each chapter gets a page with details about the included texts. Key to our work is distinguishing Christopher's words from those of his father. In particular, we are delineating the sections in a larger font that Christopher presents as the primary texts of his father. We call these p-texts. One of the things we want to enable is searching just within these p-texts.
We can search for Turin, for example, and get only the results within p-texts. Note that search is case insensitive and punctuation and diacritics are ignored. Here we can see the results within the Annals of Beleriand in Volume 4. We'll explain these citation references later in the video. For some chapters, we've started to lay out a summary of the underlying manuscripts described by Christopher, as well as visualizations of them. We're coming up with a visual language to represent single sheets, piles of paper and notebooks, as well as distinguish pencil, pen, and typescript. Much of our work on the history of Middle-earth is challenging because we're not dealing with a single cohesive published text. We can't just model multiple versions of texts because the manuscripts and typescripts are often heavily amended. The notion of a clean version of a text is often impossible. Also, we don't have access to the actual manuscripts and typescripts. The texts we have are mediated through Christopher Tolkien. On the one hand, this is a blessing. Decades of painstaking scholarship has already been done for us. But on the other hand, we must reconcile ourselves to the fact that, for now at least, the principal objects of our study are artifacts produced by Christopher Tolkien. And so we've developed a data model that enables us to describe and annotate the unpublished texts of Tolkien's legendarium in a way that gives primacy to Christopher's presentation of them. It attempts to provide a logical structure for the texts beyond the physical constraints of the volumes of the History of Middle-earth, but in a way that builds on the remarkable scholarship already done in those books.
P-texts are core to this, but there are other distinctions to make. First, we distinguish between Tolkien's words and the words of others, including Christopher, but we can then separate Christopher's text from the rest. Within Tolkien's words, we can distinguish the legendarium from other things that he wrote, for example, letters. Within the legendarium, we have those texts that are presented by Christopher in a larger font, as well as those in a smaller font. Within the smaller font texts, we have quotes that Christopher makes of his father's words in the primary texts, references to other texts, for example, the published Silmarillion, as well as new or variant material. Within that new and variant material, we can distinguish between entirely new secondary texts and variants or fragments relating to an existing p-text. We designate each of these text types with a letter, as well as a color, which can be used in visualizations. For example, shown here for the music of the Ainur chapter. For each p-text, we give the page range and number of word occurrences or tokens. We have an article describing this data model in detail, as well as some visual examples.
For example, here we have a footnote from Christopher. So most of the note is in red, but he's quoting p-text, and so that's indicated in a different colour. This is q-text. He's also giving text variants, or t-texts. In this next example, we have the words of Christopher, but he also quotes other people such as Tom Shippey, his father's writing in letters, as well as from The Lord of the Rings, and these are expressed as N, O, R, and U text. In this third example, we have a footnote to some p-text where Christopher gives a rejected draft text. So Christopher's note is N text, the text variant is T text. And finally, in this fourth example, we have a note from Christopher that quotes some p-text, provides a textual variant or t-text, and also provides a brand new text in a smaller font, a secondary text or S-text. We are working through the external quoted texts, linking them to their sources. In the case of Q-texts, we link them elsewhere in the history of Middle-earth. In the case of references to Lord of the Rings or the Silmarillion, we can build on the existing citation systems used by the Digital Tolkien project. For quoted letters, we can link to the guide to Tolkien's letters. This sort of linking is a core part of the larger Tolkien-linked open data initiative. Because of the primacy of p-texts, we often want to talk about them independent of the physical structure of the History of Middle-earth volumes, and so we give each p-text a label. Within each volume, we sequentially number each p-text, and so the first p-text in a volume is designated P1. Subsequent p-texts, if presented independently by Christopher, are given a new number, P2, P3, and so on. In some cases, Christopher presents a p-text with interruptions, and when this happens, we distinguish each part with a letter. So P8 refers to the flight of the Noldoli in the Book of Lost Tales, Part 1. But the start of the pencil draft is P8A, the next part of it in pencil which is rejected is P8B, the replacement rider is P8C, and the continuation afterwards is P8D. In something like the sketch of the mythology, where Christopher has divided it up by sections with interruptions in between for notes and commentary, they of course get a separate designation, P4A, P4B, P4C, and so on. But because Christopher has also given these section numbers, we optionally incorporate these into the labelling of the p-text. For more details, we have an article describing all this.
As we saw earlier, it's possible to search just within p-texts. If we do a p-text-only search, the results are grouped by volume, and then within that by individual p-text, and then individual occurrence. You can expand and contract individual nodes in this hierarchy, and you can open to a particular level to see all the results. Now you'll notice that for each level of the hierarchy, the counts are aggregated, so you can see how many occurrences there are within a p-text and within a volume. Also shown are the relative frequencies, so that takes into account the size of the p-text or the size of the volume. You can also search for phrases. There's the ability to export the results as CSV, and you can click on the results to get more information about where the particular occurrences are located. In this case, you're taken to a page for the p-text, with a citation index that lists every paragraph with the first few words, the citation reference to use, and also what page number it's on. Now, in various places, we've seen references to individual paragraphs or chunks, to p-texts, and to chapters and volumes.
Chapter references are structured as a dot-delimited string. The first number indicates the volume. If the work is simply divided into chapters, the next number will give you chapters. But if the chapters are grouped into parts and the chapter numbers start again with each part, the next number is the part and the final number is the chapter. In the case of p-texts, we use a colon as the delimiter just so it's clear that it is not a reference to a chapter or a chunk. So the first part is the volume and the second part is whatever p-text it is within that volume. And then for chunks, which are normally paragraphs but could also be headings, the first part is the volume, the second part is the p-text, and then the final part tells you the chunk number, the paragraph or heading number, counting from 1 at the start. As we go through more chapters and establish text types, it will be possible to search within those. As a prototype, we initially have the Music of the Ainur chapter in the Book of Lost Tales available. So if we select that and we search, for example, for Ilu, we see that the results are not just for p-texts, but for all text types, and they're grouped initially by text type, then by volume, then by chapter, and then by chunk. So in this case, Ilu, which was an original name for Iluvatar, is only mentioned in N-text, notes and commentary by Christopher, and in a text fragment of his father's that Christopher gives. If we search for something like My Father, we can see a distinction made between where My Father is used by Christopher of Tolkien, but also when it's used within p-text, in the link between the Cottage of Lost Play and Music of the Ainur, and in the Music of the Ainur itself. So far, we've focused on different text types, which we refer to as the surface structure. Another focus is understanding and presenting the underlying manuscripts and their relationships, what we call the documentary structure. In the future, we'll consider the relationship between works and stories presented across multiple works. In this chapter, we've not only given the documentary structure in terms of individual manuscripts, but also a potential timeline presented by Christopher to better understand the relationship between manuscripts and when they were written. We're also working on articles describing even more complex manuscript relationships, such as the changes Tolkien made to the Book of Lost Tales when he relocated the Tinuvial story and transitioned from the frame narrative character of Aelios to Gilfanan. We're at an early stage of development, working on the Book of Lost Tales as well as the Ainulindalea across volumes, although dipping into other chapters and volumes as research questions arise. The site has a status page where you can track progress at the book level or even chapter level.
There is much we have planned that is not yet visible, including word studies, an index of primary world dates mentioned, and an index of names, including the ability to see which manuscripts use which names for a character. We also hope to provide comprehensive links to secondary material written about the history of Middle-earth, as well as artwork depicting characters, locations, and events.
Our goal is to provide a foundation for education and scholarship. We are working with the garage door open, which means much of what appears here is provisional and incomplete. We welcome feedback and suggestions as we continue to develop the site. Please contact us if we can assist in your research in any way.